joined by Scotty John and Simon Lynch. This is our Wednesday conversation where we chat with the practitioner about their career, their views on networking and relationships, and their views on just the Treasury space in general, as well as much more. Today, we're joined by Marc Monyak, who is the Managing Director of Monyak Advisory. And this is after spending plenty of time or a very successful career at McDonald's and Ernst & Young. So Marc, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me. Same to Simon and Scotty as well, and pleased to be part of this Treasury Talent discussion.
Oh, thanks for joining us. And you're joining us from Chicago, is that right?
That's correct.
All right, perfect. And Simon, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Joe. Summertime and nice and warm. Been down at the beach. Well, up at the beach, 5 hours north, and back in Sydney now, and hoping to get to the beach this afternoon.
Perfect. And Scotty is on mute right now because, as always, we do have an open question format. We do have some questions prearranged for Marc, and he's going to talk to us about his career, networking, and relationships, and his experience in the industry. But as always, this is your official invite. If you have any questions for Marc or comments along the way, feel free to ask them. Scotty is monitoring the conversation. We're more than happy to get those answered for you. So, Scotty, now that you're off mute, you doing all right today?
Yeah, doing great. I was, as you guys all know, I'm excited about, we're finally supposed to get some snowfall here in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is what it's supposed to do in the wintertime here in Salt Lake. And I tend to love that. So fingers crossed that it's what we're all expecting.
Awesome. I'm happy to hear it. Happy for you. It would be my nightmare. So with that, Simon, let's kick off with the questions.
Marc, you had a long and successful career with McDonald's, as Joe just mentioned, and then moved the other way and went to consulting with Ernst & Young. Talk us through that transition and the things that you would put out there as the highlights from your career today.
Well, thanks, Simon. So I had the opportunity to work for McDonald's, one of the premier companies in the world, one of the premier growth companies, one of the top brands in the world, top performing. And if you exclude the tech companies, maybe one of the all-time great performing companies. To just give you some perspective, when I started there, share adjusted price was about $3, and today it's over $200. So not quite an Amazon or Apple valuation, but really strong track record of success. And I had the opportunity to do things at McDonald's that I couldn't have done anyplace else. Capital markets transactions, working in international markets. When I started, the business world and treasury world was not as global as it is today. And very few companies had made a successful transition to being global organizations. But McDonald's was a leader in that. They call it plant the flag. I think they peaked at about 120 countries. And so there was great experience to be gained with that. I was never an expat, but I worked in about 40 countries and did everything from foreign exchange to supply chain to facilities, investments, to real estate, to acquisitions and divestitures. So it was great fun. And there was an expectation at McDonald's to be world-class in whatever we did. And I feel confident, and I think it's okay to say that we're definitely a world-class Treasury department. We won a lot of awards, and it was nice to get the recognition. But there's an enormous amount of leverage in Treasury because the dollars you're dealing with are so large. So maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign exchange exposure, or $1 billion in debt, so forth. So a few basis points improvement, falls rather rapidly down to the bottom line. And if you have the opportunity to scour and be dynamic, and as an organization, if you have a reputation for doing innovative transactions, you'll see the best ideas because people want to see their ideas executed. And relationships are of paramount importance. Many of the bankers and investment bankers that I worked with at McDonald's. We've been good friends for years. And, they were able to find things that fit. I'll give you one example. McDonald's had an interest in being the first to issue in different markets. So they were actually before my time, but they issued the first Deutsche bonds in the Eurobond market. Okay, currency that doesn't even exist, hasn't existed for decades. I was part of issuing the first bond in Hungarian forints after the wall came down. And we wanted to be the first company to issue in the RMB market. And we pursued this for a number of years. One afternoon, I'm sitting at my desk, the phone rings, and it was the vice chair of Standard Chartered. He said, Mark, we think we have a mechanism where we can help you to issue a bond. But it's the first one. It's never been tested. We don't know if it'll work. And I answered him, we've drilled dry holes before. If this is another dry hole, so be it. But we'd be interested. And we were the first company to issue a RMB bond. And it got 5 million media hits when we did it. And, McDonald's is obviously a great brand in China, but there's also a lot of other fine companies like Walmart and Carrefour and others and car companies. Perhaps you've heard of them. And, the Chinese regulators chose McDonald's to go forward with. After having been at McDonald's and done a variety of roles, I frankly thought I had done all the things. I thought I had done the most interesting things there. And I had done most of the interesting things to do. And so I wanted to see another part of life. And I got a call from Ernst & Young. They were actually McDonald's auditor. I'd worked with them my entire career, and I had no idea that they did what I do. And I joined their Treasury Consulting group and spent 6 years there, which was a great experience because I got a chance to work with literally dozens of companies. So some pre-IPO, some were transaction work, either mergers or carve-outs, setting up treasury departments, restructuring treasury organizations, treasury systems, controls, which are ever increasingly important, fraud prevention, and so forth. And so I saw a whole different form of life. I saw how treasury was practiced in different places, and had the opportunity to work with clients to improve their practices. And then, as you referenced, I've set up my own organization to do the same thing, Monyak Advisory at present, to work with clients and a more one-on-one approach, getting into specific situations and opportunities that organizations have in Treasury. A lot of times, unfortunately, Treasury is not given the time and attention that it likely deserves. And there's not always a recognition of two things. One, I had a boss at McDonald's, and he used to say, "This is real money." Okay, so when you're in the accounting group or the tax group, you're doing filings, you're doing financial statements. It's very important work, but no money flows out the door. Versus the Treasury Department, it's how you fund the company, the viability of the company, risk protection, loss protection, and you really have a tremendous ability, as I said, to every small benefit turns into large bottom line savings, and so really was a very good match.
Now, I'll tell you what, that "this is real money" quote, I can already see Simon's LinkedIn posts. That's a huge takeaway. I think our audience will definitely appreciate. And it's true. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. We talk about it often. That's phenomenal. Also, just, I mean, the fact that you issued the first corporate bond in China, that's impressive. That's really cool.
Marc,
In
can I
terms,
just ask, sorry, Scotty, can I just
oh, no,
ask, Marc,
please.
was the wanting to be the first around the PR and the branding that came from that, or was it another reason?
So it was the branding and PR, both from a company-wide perspective and then from a treasury and finance perspective. If you want to be the gold standard, then you have to be the first to do things. And
Awesome.
so we wanted people, when they said, who's the best in treasury, to automatically say McDonald's. And we wanted, positive press around McDonald's treasury and financing activities because it, showed the character and caliber of the overall organization.
Well, aside from giving the advice to go to work for the gold standard in the corporate treasury world, what's one piece of advice you'd go back and give your 25-year-old self?
Well, the advice I always got was to be more patient, and I never took that advice. And I think the advice I would give would be to not take that advice. You can't wait around for things, and you can't wait around for opportunities. So I think I generally did the right thing by being collaborative, but being on point, and put me in the game, coach. Give me the ball, coach.
Really,
It's interesting
really
you
comes
say
down
that,
to
Marc, because
sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting you say that, Marc, because I think that it is one of those things that we see a lot. There's always a blocker in treasury, and so if your boss is going nowhere, the nature of treasury is you have to actually go externally to get that next role, because it's just not a really, it's not a big field. So yeah, I think that, for listeners out there, it's definitely something that I get asked a lot. And I don't think it's a bad thing that if there isn't a role internally and you've waited your time, or the time that you're willing to wait, then, going externally to get that is really the best option for you.
Yeah, it's really just situational awareness, right? Being able to read the room, being able to read who's in front of you, having those relationships, being able to rely on that. And if you're going to sit around and wait for someone to tap you on the shoulder for the next opportunity, or that's the situation that you're in, the other option is to go create it yourself. And it sounds like we know that you have a track record of doing that. So that's really cool. Along those same lines, you had mentioned the relationships with your bankers and your investment bankers, some of your best friends today. And obviously in the consulting space, relationships in your network is equally as important. What's been your approach to networking and relationships and mentorship throughout your career? And what advice would you give to the audience in that respect?
So I would say collaboration and character. I think it's really true that it could take decades to build a reputation and one day to destroy it. When people know, like that phone call I talked about with Standard Chartered, they knew. I also didn't go to anyone that I reported to tell to ask permission, because I knew what we wanted to do, and I knew that I had the authority to, have that conversation. I would say it's important to always, I'm not big on the concept of asking forgiveness, not permission. I think you really need to know where your levels of authorization are and have a clear understanding. And it's also helpful because you can be in a situation where you don't want to give an answer right away. And you want to have time to think about it and respond, and bring other people in or getting other input is a way to get multiple benefits out of it. And then I think my contact list, has probably 100 plus go-to people in all facets. Where if I have a question on something, I can reach out to my friends. They're happy to help me, and we reciprocate that. We've done good business together, but sometimes it's just being helpful. So, it might be a banking contact who can make an introduction. It might be a week ago, I reached out to the former counsel for our benefit plans at McDonald's with a question that a client had, for guidance. I wasn't asking her to give me a legal brief or legal advice, but I thought I was correct in the answer I wanted to give, but I wanted to get a double check from her. She was happy to do it. We caught up on, what was happening in her life and her family and so forth. So it's a natural thing, and it certainly makes me stronger. And I hope I reciprocate that to, the other people.
Marc, what's the thing that you really look for when you're hiring your direct reports? What are the key things in your direct report hiring?
So I like really smart technical people. That can, I like to, in a year plus ago, sit around a table, roll up your sleeves, and figure out the answers to things. Now we do that in Teams and Zoom. The adjustment to that was, actually fairly quick. But you put it on the screen, collaborate, and hash out the answers. And people that can work in a team environment. I love culture. I love how, as you go around the world, the cultural differences, or the culture, I don't like the word differences, the cultural uniqueness as you work with people and going into the different environments and developing credibility. And never tried to copy anybody. I never bowed. I thought that would look phony, right? I'm a 6'4" Westerner, and I need to be me. And nobody was expecting me to do some of those other things. But we could speak the same language, and I've been able to work effectively in China, Korea, India, Australia, Brazil, France, UK, Germany, Central Europe, because people respond to wanting to communicate, wanting to get things done, and they're really interesting, and it can be a lot of fun.
And so, Marc, on that then, like really strong technical, do you put more weight on the technical side of things than the softer skills, or the soft skills are still a key in that?
So I'd say about 70-30 technical.
That makes absolute sense.
I don't think I've too often encountered people that are too technical and can't work with others. So I frankly have not worried about that much. But the things that you always have to be cognizant of are teamwork, collaboration, empowerment, fairness, and certainly, if we work in the workplace in any environment, we'll see examples where those things are not as good as they could be, and your organization really suffers when that happens.
No, it makes sense. It's the technical skills that'll get you in the door, right? And then the soft skills, you do have to be able to collaborate with others and work in a team, especially with some of the projects that you've worked on, or just being part of a treasury function. You can't completely ignore it, but at the same time, you got to have that base knowledge to be able to act on, right?
Yeah, to get back to say the China bond. So our treasurer at McDonald's, he wanted me to go to all the meetings with the regulators. And I said, no, I said, we have an outstanding treasurer in China. And I said, if I go, the meeting's in English, there's a Westerner there. The nuances are not going to be as identifiable. I'm going to detract by being there. His name's Lebo, but he goes by Bob. Bob is better positioned to run the meeting without me. So, empowering your people and trusting your people is, paramount. And, same for the people who empowered me and trusted me at times.
Now, throughout the course of your career, especially on the consulting side, you worked for a world-class organization and treasury function at McDonald's. You've since seen plenty of other treasury functions and operations on the consulting side. Putting all of that together, what makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the C-level or the board, just based off of your experience?
So there's certain things that are assumed. We're getting a little echo here. There's certain things that are assumed: financial security, controls. That there's really no leeway on that, and you have to be ever vigilant because the fraudsters are ever more resourceful. But you can save 30 basis points on a bond and be hacked, and it doesn't matter how good you were in capital markets. And we certainly know from the public press, it doesn't matter if it's Microsoft or the United States government, everybody gets hacked. And having the proper controls in place. So boards and management and shareholders rely extensively on the treasurer in that role. And then, as we've talked about, the ways to add value, so because the numbers are so large, and then the management reporting. So do you have good dashboards? Do you have good liquidity? Do you have proper planning? Do you have proper cash flow forecasting? And are you prioritizing what you need? So I had a client who's a high-tech equipment manufacturer, iconic company, well-known company. And they always had $1 to $2 billion of cash on their balance sheet historically. And appropriately, they didn't put much effort into cash flow forecasting. It wasn't relevant. And then they were bought by PE, and they became highly leveraged. So they had to go from not having much of a function in cash flow forecasting to having a really strong function, and we worked with them on that. But that's the knowing where the priorities are. And then in terms of thinking for this conversation, I had this conversation with my son as well, more in terms of a global context than a treasury context. But basically every 5 to 10 years, there's a major crisis. So we certainly for the past year have had a major crisis. We know what that is. Before that was the financial crisis, which was a major crisis. Yeah. Before that was 9/11. Before that was the Iraq invasion. So you can go through all the history, but basically every 5 to 10 years there'll be a major disruptive event in politics and the economy and the global economy that's completely unforeseen. And I think one of the things from a treasury perspective is you have to plan for that. And I can assure you, any plan you have will be wrong, but it'll be a starting point. Right? You'll have the information. You'll know where your risks are. There was not a company in the United States or the world a year ago who thought they would go to zero revenue overnight. If I had made one prediction a year ago on this call and said, a year from now, we'll all be wearing masks. We're not at our homes on Zoom. And you would have said, okay, it's time to wrap up this call. We think Marc's lost it, right? If that was the only prediction I made, okay, so we know outlandish, inconceivable things will happen. We just don't know where they are. And the ability to mobilize and move quickly. I'll give you another McDonald's example that didn't happen. But during the financial crisis, we were contingency planning if the euro unwound. Okay, we were in every country in Europe. My responsibilities were in Asia, but I had the technical currency expertise. And then I say, well, I just work in Asia. And we had a contingency plan for what would happen if the euro failed. Thankfully, it didn't, because we're all better off for it. And like I said, whatever plan we had, I guarantee you, was 100% wrong. But we had all the information. We had a starting point, so we could prospectively react more quickly. When in March of last year, I heard at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning that sadly there were over 200 deaths in Italy the day before, which now seems better than the current situation, sadly. I contacted the CFO of the client I work for and said, draw down your revolver right away. You need to have liquidity. We don't know what's happening here. And then when things stabilized, they were able, they paid it back. But I did not want them to be short of liquidity when the events were so uncertain.
Yeah, that's planning, foresight, controls, processes. I mean, that's all of that planning ahead of time is what prepares you to be able to handle the crises that do arise from time to time.
Yeah, it's a great segue too, Marc, to the final question we have for you today, which is, particularly with the advancements we're seeing in technology, how do you see the role of the treasurer evolving in the coming years?
So at the highest, so there's two levels of treasury, right? One is treasury controls and protecting the assets, payments, and liquidity of the company. And the other is analytics. And the higher you are in analytics, the more value you'll be able to add. And we've seen over time is a lot of the less analytic activity has been replaced by technology or service centers. But we know technology is always escalating. And I think in the robotics field, we're going to see that increasingly happening within Treasury and carving out a lot of repetitive tasks, a lot of repetitive work, and doing it better. Treasury still has a lot of manual functions. I think the activity of doing things by hand is largely gone, but not always. But there's a proxy for that in Excel where people are effectively doing manual functions, but they call it Excel. And some of the times I've seen things that they're spreadsheets where companies, if they costed out the person hours that had gone into the spreadsheet, they would be flabbergasted by how expensive it was, and doing it the right way in technology would have been less expensive and less risky, because we all know if you make one formula error in an incredibly complex Excel spreadsheet, it can lead to very bad results. And it also makes you dependent on who's the person who can maintain the spreadsheet. If they leave or they're sick or they go on paternity leave, you could be in a challenged situation. So having the right technology and riding up that technology curve is always important.
Excellent. And we haven't actually gotten any questions from the audience. I guess I'll just give a last call here to those of you watching today. Maybe we threw you for a loop. a little bit on the later start, but still no questions coming. We'll give it a second here, Mark, but we're just about ready to take you off the hot seat, I think.
Well, I've enjoyed the discussion, and obviously through Treasury Talent or LinkedIn or so forth, if anybody has a question they want to reach out, I'd be happy to answer it and post it.
Yeah, and again, allow me to speak on behalf of Scotty and Simon and saying thank you very much for your time. You certainly have an interesting story and plenty of war stories throughout the course of your career. I know we've known you for a little while now, and I've always enjoyed just hearing your experiences and just your view from the consulting side and knowing that you have that mix of consulting and corporate and what unique experience that is. So again, thank you for taking the time to sit down and answer our questions and tell your story to the audience. Scotty, with that, did anyone else chime in, or are we good to go?
Nope, we're all set.
All right, perfect. Well, Mark, with that, we'll take you off the hot seat, man. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, and I enjoyed it. So look forward to our next conversation.
All right, thanks. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone, for tuning in. We will be back Friday with Ask a Treasurer. The following Monday will be Ask a Treasury Recruiter. And then Wednesday, as always, we will have our practitioner conversations. With that, have a great evening, and we'll